U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria have been attacked nearly 40 times in the last 30 days. Why can't the U.S. stop these attacks? What can it do to deter these attacks? And more importantly, why are they continuing even after the U.S. supposedly destroyed the facilities these groups are based in? I'm going to break it all down right now. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is coming to us from the VOA, right? So if you don't know, Voice of America is sort of like an official news outlet of the U.S. government. It is sponsored by the U.S. government, and their primary role is to provide free press services in countries and places where there aren't necessarily the free press. So, for example, a Russian could log in with, say, a VPN and read legitimate news that isn't filtered through the BS lens of Russia. VOA is actually politically insulated fairly well from the political establishment, i.e. VOA leadership broadly doesn't get involved in policy-making decisions or get told what stories they can and can't cover. There's actually a fair amount of VOA stories that are critical of the United States, something that just doesn't happen in places like Venezuela or Russia or other areas. Now, obviously, there's, I think, some stories that VOA just won't touch. Right. But you can see here, just from their main site, right? Prosecutor says politics didn't affect Hunter Biden investigation. U.S. aid in Israel trapped in government funding battle. These are stories that you would never get in somewhere like Russia. So the point is that VOA is a government-backed source, but you should treat it, especially when it comes to stories like this, with a pretty high degree of trust. Okay, so let's talk about this particular story. The Pentagon is confirming that 38 different attacks have targeted U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria over the last 30 days. And you can see that these are drones or rockets made and targeted by Iranian-backed groups 38 times in less than a month. And critically, 6 of these attacks have just been in the last 48 hours. And while most of these attacks were disrupted by the U.S. military or never reached their intended target at all, and the casualties, while significant in number, 46 military personnel, they are almost always very, very low levels of casualty. So, for example, shrapnel, which that's a real wound. I don't know what else to tell you, but headaches, perforated eardrums, tinnitus, even things like a rolled ankle. One of the things that I will share is that, if our rule was when I was deployed was that, if you were injured by the enemy, then we need to create a document of that, regardless of how severe the injury is. Why? Let's say, for example, you have a headache after getting hit with an IED. You never lost consciousness. You go, I'm fine, LT. And I go, that's okay. We'll put you back on duty, but there needs to be paperwork that shows that you had a head injury while you were deployed, because 5, 10, 15 years from now, if you have chronic headaches or migraines or post-concussion syndrome, you want to be able to go to the government, to the VA, and say, listen, I was injured in combat. I can prove it. And at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal, but lo and behold, it wasn't. Right? How often has that happened to you? You say, man, I was raking leaves and, my arm kind of got sore there. And then the next day you wake up and you can't move your arm above your head, right? That's why the injury numbers are very high, because it is soldiers being reasonable and taking care of themselves and making sure that they are able to claim their benefits as they're entitled to, right? Obviously, they risk their lives going out there in Iraq and Syria. And so that's why even things like a rolled ankle, again, if 5 years down the line, that soldier goes, wow, my ankle has arthritis. Well, because they documented that they rolled their ankle, getting into a bunker in Iraq or Syria, they're going to get the medical care they need, right? Of course, traumatic brain injuries are no joke. They are very serious. So these injuries range from very serious to very, very minor, right? But the drone attacks, of course, targeting the U.S. base in Erbil. This is Iraqi Kurdistan. a drone that crashed before it could explode. But now you're also seeing more complex things like multi-drone attacks at Al-Assad Air Base and a multi-drone attack at the Al-Tanif garrison in Syria. This shows that there's a growing level of sophistication among the attacks, right? They're showing that they're not just one-off, yahoos throwing drones at U.S. soldiers, that these are part of systemic operations. And they're using, of course, Iranian-provided drones, or at least drones that we can all sort of infer are Iranian provided, right? But these attacks are not necessarily successful. But what's most troubling is that the U.S. thought that it had a deterrence with Iranians. Iranian-backed groups launched the first spate of attacks around 2 weeks ago. The U.S. responded in kind by destroying what they believed were major munition sites where these groups trained and operated. But instead, and the thought was that this would stop the Iranians, that they would learn and understand that the U.S. could reach out and touch them and weren't going to take these things lying down. But instead, they appear to have escalated. The Iranian, right, several lawmakers are saying, quote, the attacks are going to come faster. They're going to spread beyond Syria and Iraq, and they will involve weaponry of increasing sophistication. And it says legality. I think this is a quote from Marco Rubio. I think he means lethality. Lethality is a military term that describes the effectiveness of a weapon system, how good it is at achieving its desired battlefield effects. All right. And Lloyd Austin says, if this doesn't stop, we will respond. But again, it's scary because the first strikes didn't stop this, the U.S. is going to have to escalate. They're going to have to do something more powerful. And you hope that they're going to target it at these proxy groups. You hope that you're going to see them wipe these proxy groups off the map. But even operating independently in Iraq and Syria, it's not clear the Iraqi government wants U.S. forces operating, hunting down groups within their country. It's not clear that the Syrian government will permit that. Again, is the U.S. going to listen to the Syrian government? Probably not. But, it's not clear that anybody's really in charge in Syria. And so I say all of this to understand that, there's a lot of people out there who make a lot of hype about dangerous escalations of the war, but this actually is a troubling escalation. Now we're not close to like capital W war with Iran. Like, don't kid yourself. But what we are is troublingly close to returning to combat operations in at least some limited scope in places like Iraq and Syria, which is not something the U.S. can or should be doing right now. And it's not clear that this is something the U.S. is resourced to do to the scale that it needs to be. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. And that's about it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.